right, welcome to the Americans for Limited Government podcast. We are live. You can probably tell we're live right now, and it is the beginning of the impeachment garbage in the minds of many. We've now had the rules handed down by Senate Leader Mitch McConnell on how this impeachment process will begin, and those rules have been read by the man who I am speaking with, Americans for Limited Government President Rick Manning. Rick, the Democrats are panicking. They're saying that these rules are, they're going to keep witnesses from showing up at this trial. Is that malarkey?
Well, and as the viewers know, we've got the split screen with the actual impeachment comments being made by impeachment manager Adam Schiff complaining about the rules. Here's what the rules do. They lay out some very simple things. They lay out what the timelines are for the House to make their case and for the president to make his case. Each side will be given 24 hours, a total of 24 hours of time, and they to present over 2 days. So they're going to be able to present their case and present their case, both of them. Then before that, the Senate will have to vote on these rules. So McConnell doesn't just get to say these are the rules. A majority of the Senate, if 51 senators vote for the rules, then those are the rules. And so the Democrats are attempting to attack those rules as being unfair under the precept that they believe that the rules should up front dictate that witnesses will be called, when in fact these rules actually almost identically mirror the rules of the Clinton impeachment, where the Senate then made a decision as to whether or not, after both sides presented their case, the Senate made a decision on whether or not to present witnesses and how those witnesses should be heard. And so it lays out a little bit on the witnesses, though, because it says if witnesses are going to be heard, the first thing that has to happen is they have to be deposed by both sides. So no surprise witnesses. No, we're bringing in people who the other side hasn't had a chance to talk to. And after those depositions, the Senate can decide if they want to hear from those witnesses. Senator McConnell learned from the hearing with the Kavanaugh hearings, what I'm trying to come out with, from the Kavanaugh hearing, where the Democrats continually threw new witnesses in who no one in their right mind would take seriously, but they kept bringing up new witness after new witness after new witness who just had to be heard because they were desperately clinging for anything. Senator McConnell's not going to let Adam Schiff get away with that in this impeachment trial. So it is the rules are perfectly fair. After all is said and done, after both sides have made their case and presented arguments, then the Senate will decide, do we want to hear witnesses or do we know what we want to do? And at that point, the Senate will make that choice. So when the House Democrat managers say they're not allowing witnesses, that's not true. What they're allowing is for them to make their case, and if the Senate believes those witnesses would make sense, then they're going to be allowed, the Senate can vote to allow witnesses. But this idea that they're not being allowed witnesses is absurd. Now, the truth is, if I were a senator, I think they should have to stand on their own 2 feet. They impeached this president based on the witnesses and the testimony that they received in the House. Trying to now force the Senate to be the investigatory body is wrong. It's not the role of the Senate in the impeachment. And if the House if Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff wanted to actually have a lot of other witnesses, they had 28 days between their impeachment and when they brought the articles of impeachment over to the Senate, 28 days, and they didn't go to court to try to compel any witnesses to testify. They did nothing but complain. If they actually wanted witnesses to testify, they should have gone to court and fought the legal battle about whether or not executive privilege should be broken in order to meet, so they could interview certain people who are close confidants in the presidential team in the White House.
Now, what documents and witnesses could actually help change what the Senate is inevitably going to do? Is there anything out there that could really turn the tides? I mean,
No, I
it
don't.
just
Well,
it
here's
feels
the
like you
thing.
know a lot. No.
Let me give you the scenario that the House managers are hoping for. They get a John Bolton to testify, and John Bolton says, "Well, there was a lot of consideration based on policy whether or not this should be done or not." And so then the question that would be asked to John Bolton, well, what actually occurred? Well, I was fired on September 11th, so it happened after I was fired. But what actually occurred was the money got released. So the actual, the entire, they looked at the president. Here's the big case. The president looked at a range of options, said, is this what we want to do? Is this the right foreign policy option? Are the specific Ukrainian authorization requires a certification that they're dealing with corruption? How have they been dealing with corruption? What's happening on corruption? Is it bring me all the data so I can make a decision whether to go to the Congress and say we want to pull this back through a process called rescission or not. The president has a right to say, I don't want to spend this money. It's not the right thing to do. So we're pulling it back. But this Congress has to agree to that. The president has every right to make that decision. And so they're making that decision. And that's what's happening while our good friends are complaining that they were unlawfully breaking, not providing the support that had been agreed to. They're actually being impeached because they gave the Ukrainians support 3 weeks earlier than it needed to go. So that's the ultimate irony. The Ukrainian support went 3 weeks before it actually was required to go.
Now, two questions about John Bolton. First off, is it a good idea to have a former national security advisor testifying, and perhaps
no.
showing
the answer
the
is
hand?
No. And let me just answer the first one. Hold on to the second question, but let me answer the first one. The president of the United States has to be able to talk to his aides about options, about different things that can be done without fear that those aides are going to be then put in front of a congressional committee and forced to testify to the options, not the actions that were taken. Absolutely, you should have to defend the actions that were actually taken. But to actually have to go through and say, yeah, we considered this, a whole wide range of options and rejected them in order to go down this one path, basically makes it so the president can't examine any options. They can't ask experts about what they think about different ideas. They can't say, well, what if we do this? Or what if we do that? And if we tie the hands of any president, not just this one, any president, where they can't examine a wide range of options on how to meet America's interests and are forced to operate in a vacuum, at that point, we've effectively neutered the presidency and we've made this country much weaker. It's damaging to the country to make it so a John Bolton or a Mick Mulvaney have to testify, because at that point, no president ever again will be able to trust that a conversation they have with their close staff is going to be held as a conversation with close staff. And at that point, you can't have those conversations and it hurts America. So your next question.
Yeah, and does this impeachment proceeding start feeling like it's just a frivolous lawsuit? Really, I mean, that's what it feels. And this is an impeachment of the president. Another question about John Bolton is how many people, not just in the Senate, but Americans watching, are going to dismiss 90% of what he says as a disgruntled former employee who's mad at Donald Trump because their egos clashed a few months ago?
Well, bottom line is he's not going to say anything that matters from a factual standpoint. We know what actually happened. We know that the president told Senator Ron Johnson on August 30th, one day after there was a report that the money was being withheld, told Ron Johnson that no, he didn't want anything for the money. Ron Johnson was going into a meeting the next day, along with Vice President Pence, with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. And so they were going into a meeting. Ron Johnson calls them, well, what do we want? What do you want in order to get this money released? And the president said nothing. And I think you're going to like the outcome, the decision we made, implying to Ron Johnson that the money was going to get released, which is what Ron Johnson wanted to have occur. So Senator Ron Johnson actually spoke with the president, asked him the question. Nobody else did before that meeting. And the president
Yeah.
gave him the answer. And the answer was no quid pro quo. So all this nonsense about quid pro quo is just that. It's made up. It's based on the presumption of one ambassador who presumed that there's a quid pro quo and went and took it on himself to tell that to the Ukrainians. And then the word spread throughout the diplomatic community, and 3/4 of the witnesses that the House called were people who heard it from somebody else. And it all started with one guy, a guy named Sondland, Ambassador Sondland, who testified that he presumed it. And when, get this, Frank, when he called the president and asked him directly about whether there should be a quid pro quo, the president said no quid pro quo. So
No.
there's no there. So yes, this is the most basic slap suit that you've ever seen, done by a bunch of charlatans on the left who set out from day one to impeach this president.
Absolutely. Now that I think is common knowledge. Now, do they really? They tend to dismiss Trump as just being some wild lunatic on his Twitter account all day. Do they really think that he would call for a quid pro quo? And also, can the OMB testify to their knowledge of any quid?
No, because
quid
the same
pro quo?
reason. Well, first of all, Mick Mulvaney is the head of the OMB. He's also the acting chief of staff. So, and Mick Mulvaney can't, because of that role, he's under executive privilege also. So no, the OMB has to be able to have those conversations as well, in terms of everything. And here's the bottom line. Okay, the bottom line on all this: the Ukrainian government says they never were even made aware by the U.S. government that the money was being withheld. So they didn't know it until it was reported in the press. And the president of Ukraine said he was never asked to do anything in exchange for it. So the people who supposedly they was asking a quid pro quo from were unaware of that, according to their own statements. We know that Joe Biden was on a video that the president and most of America were pretty much aware of, bragging that he used a threat to withhold aid to the Ukraine in order to force the firing of a prosecutor who was in fact investigating the company, Burisma, that Joe Biden's son was getting paid a lot of money to be on the board of directors of. So and we also know that Joe Biden played an instrumental role as he drove U.S. policy in the Ukraine. And as a result, it would be natural for Ukrainian leaders to wonder, is Joe Biden off limits? After all, the ambassador of the United States was refusing to provide visas to Ukrainian officials who wanted to go to the United States to meet with Department of Justice officials to lay out corruption that they had found in Ukraine. And the U.S. ambassador was denying them those visas. So there was reason for the Ukraine government to wonder whether Joe Biden was off limits. I don't know, and no one knows, if Joe Biden engaged in any activity that was against the law. What we do know is that it was a massive appearance of impropriety, and that appearance of impropriety would certainly make it reasonable for the president to say to President Zelensky, that yes, it's okay to investigate what was going on with Biden. A lot of people in the U.S. would like to know if that was true, because quite honestly, Joe Biden should not be accused without having a chance to have it be dealt with. And he's really accused in the public domain as being a corrupt individual. And so he should welcome an investigation rather than kind of cowering from one.
Yeah, and Rudy Giuliani's been talking openly about some of the corruption that's just in the air. A lot of the corruption that's in the air in the Ukraine. What are they doing business in the Ukraine in the first place for? I mean, wouldn't you just want to stay away from that? And that's one.
Well, Ukraine, from a geopolitical standpoint, Ukraine is extremely important. It's a gateway to Europe from Russia, and so it matters a lot. We had a memorandum of understanding with the Ukraine government when they broke off from the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union fell apart. We did a memorandum of understanding with them that we would provide a mutual defense for them in exchange for them getting the nuclear weapons that were in the Ukraine out of Ukraine. So they denuclearized it based on a promise made to them at the end of the Soviet Union. So it's a complicated relationship, but Ukraine is one of the most corrupt places in the entire world. The
So
guy
why,
who's the guy who's president now was a comedian. He
he
ran
used to
as a
play a
comedian,
president.
and
He
he
played
got
the
elected. He played a president on TV, exactly right. And he became president because everybody else was so corrupt that they said, "Why not this guy?" It's kind of like saying, "I really like West Wing, so I'm going to have Martin Sheen be president." Not and it doesn't make sense because he's an actor. Okay, he's a comedian and an actor, but that doesn't mean he's any less president of Ukraine. So it's very corrupt. He's trying to clean up corruption, and and all this stuff is getting in the way of him being able to do that because the fact of the matter is, Ukraine doesn't want to be the centerpiece of an impeachment investigation against the president when the Ukraine president agreed that the president of the United States did nothing wrong.
Yeah, and it just seems like if you're in the American business community, even if you're not involved in politics, Ukraine might be something you want to stay away from just because of the trouble attached to it. Now, also, Donald Trump has added Alan Dershowitz, a famed attorney, to his defense team, and Alan Dershowitz's trademark is this is a character assassination. You are accusing my client of such and such. This is a character assassination. Would he be able to use that defense here? In many ways, he could.
Well, it is a character assassination, and that's what it's always been intended to be. Yesterday was the 30th 3-year anniversary of the president's inauguration, and people will remember that 20 minutes after he was inaugurated at noon on January 2017, 20 minutes later, the Washington Post declared that impeachment has begun. So this has been 3 years of a character assassination against this president.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I think America's sick of it.
Yeah,
You're watching the impeachment proceedings that are going on in the split screen, and you'll see Pat Cipollone talking. And one of the interesting things is Adam Schiff, even today, tried to get Pat Cipollone, who is the White House counsel, disqualified from being a prosecutor on this because he was a material witness because he was inside the White House. And you sit there and you go, what world does the House think they can set the rules in the Senate? They can tell the president who's going to represent him. I mean, effectively, the House wants to have their cake and eat it too. They got to do that on the House side when they didn't treat this president fairly, but they're not going to be able to deny this president his rights of defense, even no matter how hard they try.
Yeah, it does seem like it's just bizarre. You had Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff. Do they forget that they are now under the rule of Mitch McConnell? Did America forget that this is now under the rule of Mitch McConnell? If they think Mitch McConnell is going to get rid of President Trump,
just be clear. They're under the rule of the Senate. Mitch
yeah,
McConnell wrote the rules, but he wrote the rules talking to senators about what they wanted, and then the senators had to vote on it. And so the rules that were established by the Senate. Just because Senate Majority Leader created them and presented them, he doesn't get to act unilaterally. Nancy Pelosi acted unilaterally in the House when she declared, we're going to impeach without having a vote of the House. That was unprecedented because she
yeah,
acted unilaterally without the support of her own conference. In the Senate, Mitch McConnell laid out rules, and the Senate's either has or will vote on those rules. And if the Senate doesn't vote for those rules, other rules will be developed. So there'll be negotiation about what those rules should be. But if the Senate votes for those rules, those are the Senate rules, and that's exactly how the Senate sets the rules every single year. Every 2 years at the beginning of the Senate term,
yeah.
is they all vote on it, and as long as 51 senators vote on the rules, those are the rules, and that's what's happening here. So don't be kind of this isn't a Mitch McConnell referendum. This is about fair rules that are based upon what they did with Clinton, that, by the way, passed 100-0 in the
Yeah.
during Clinton's impeachment, 100-0, And the Democrats in the House and the Senate are objecting to the same rules that Clinton was tried under. Seems pretty
Yeah,
absurd to me.
yeah, again, and it seems like this is less of an impeachment hearing, more of like a dismissal of frivolous charges. Is there a legal remedy that could be done real quick, where they just say, according to this loophole here,
Well, they've
this
told
law that
Adam.
was passed in
Yes,
1974?
the answer is there is a McConnell put part of the rules. It creates an escape hatch. If Adam Schiff and the House managers team is not following the rules, if they're going crazy, then the Senate can put an end to it immediately and just say, nope, we've had enough, and they can vote to end the case. So that is a possibility. I don't anticipate that occurring, but that is a possibility. So one of the hardest things for the senators is going to be they don't get to talk. They have to sit there and listen. They can take notes on a pad of paper. They don't get electronic devices. They don't get computers. So it's really going to be hard for them in a lot of respects because even senators are used to being able to be distracted with their cell phones and their computers and everything else and doing 1,000 different things while not really paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, they are enforcing no distracted driving rules. Okay, this is serious. No distractions. Pay attention. Stay awake. Okay, it's basic. What the Senate has to do is senators have to pay attention and stay awake. Basic things. We'll see if they can do it.
Yeah, that would be, that's probably the real question here. Of course, I don't know if you were a huge fan of Jon Stewart, but if you remember a few months ago, he testified and members of the committee didn't show up and he exposed that for America. So if you weren't a fan of his, you had to be a fan of that action. That was a very important
Yeah,
thing.
he was upset that and I'm not going to defend the process, but the fact is, members have multiple commitments at the same time, and so they typically during committee hearings they go in, they make their statement, they ask their questions, but they don't sit through the entirety of the committee hearing because they have other meetings that talking about different pieces of legislation and the like, and then they can read the transcripts of the committee afterwards. And so it doesn't make much of a difference whether they're sitting there for window dressing or if they're coming in and out. The fact is the record and they still review it.
Okay, now they're calling this, one of the terms I've been hearing is the docket rocket technique, where they just get this thing through the process, make it forgotten, the impeachment proceedings, make it something that's forgotten by what we're hearing now is the State of the Union, or make it so it's completed by the State of the Union, and so maybe Trump can give it one line in his speech. Do you think that's possible, or is this going to be drawn out?
State of the Union is February 4th, and that'll be up to the Senate. The Senate will have to decide what they want to do, but based on the rules that Senator McConnell laid out, this thing could be a vote on acquittal or conviction could be as early as middle of next week. And so you have, these guys are going to be meeting 6 days, for 6 straight days, and then they get a day off, they get Sunday off, then they'll take 6 more days. And the timing has been laid out pretty directly. There'll be 2 days for the House, 2 days for the president to make his case. There'll be essentially 14 hours for questions from the Senate. There'll be 2 hours and 2 hours of back and forth from the House and from the defense. And then the Senate will decide whether or not they want to have witnesses. So that's the kind of the timeline. And if they decide they don't want to have witnesses, at that point they move pretty rapidly towards a vote, a disposition. But anybody who's watching this on TV, if you want to watch 24 hours of Adam Schiff, trust me, you're gonna think it's plenty long.
Yes, that is true. I actually have been watching some of his work while I'm at the gym, and man, it's like turn the channel so I can continue here on the treadmill without having to watch this.
Maybe a lot of broken TVs in America. It may be good for the TV industry because because there'll be a lot of broken TVs as people throw their shoes through them. But apart from that, it's the process is laid out, and the House managers will be given adequate time to be able to make their case. The president will be given adequate time to make his defense, and then a decision will be made if the Senate wants to hear more.
Yes, and so where do they go? what's the next hit job that the Democrats try to do on Trump if this fails, and it presumably will fail? Are they going to hold off and just let the hit jobs be done as part of the campaigns in the 2020 election, or are they going to get them on something else? What are they going to look for? Do they say, hey, wait a minute, we're monitoring social media like that?
The Democrats only have one thing, and that is we hate Trump. And since they're running on "we hate Orange Man bad" is their entire platform, they will be, they'll continue to try to get his his tax returns, and they'll try to get,
Yeah,
we'll hear again about Stormy Daniels, and we'll hear about, we kind of know the list of characters because when one thing falls by the wayside, they seem to come up with, basically have a retinue of different things and accusations they want to bring to the forefront. So I would anticipate that you would see a lot of that. On the Senate side, I would hope that you'll see a lot of conversation about what actually did happen in Ukraine and getting to the bottom of the Biden situation. I would hope that you'd actually have, assuming that this impeachment trial will merely, if witnesses are called or if things are stated about different things that have happened, the Senate will be able to look at those things and say, wait a second, we need to look at that. And so you may see the Senate taking up those things. And then pulling into the mix, you're going to have, Bill Barr and John Durham are still looking at the origins of the entire Russiagate situation and the corruption of the FBI, DOJ, CIA, and the State Department. And you can name a bunch of other intelligence agencies. And and that corruption and how it occurred, and whether or not laws were broken, and if laws were not broken, is there a need to recommend legislation to make sure that our intelligence services are never, ever, ever, ever weaponized again? And on top of that, then you'll have the FISA system, the FISA court, which was at the bottom of, which was abused by the FBI officials and DOJ officials to spy on the Trump campaign. The FISA court reauthorization is going to be coming up, and there will be a real debate in the House and the Senate about whether or not we should continue to allow for the allowed domestic spying based on rumors and innuendo. And so the whole FISA court, which was supposed to be a stop against abuse, prosecutorial abuse, and has turned into a rubber stamp. There'll be a lot of conversation about whether or not that's viable, whether it should be eliminated, whether or not it needs to be strengthened in order to protect those people who are subjected to secret warrants based on false reports. And so that will be another fight that will occur during Congress. So after the impeachment, there's lots that's going to be happening. There'll be trade deals. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be happening. But hopefully, this impeachment will be mercifully short and the American people can get on to the rest of their business.
Yeah. And we might also have to calculate how much tax money went into this and how much wasted time.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. With the amount of money these guys spend on a daily basis when they're not tied up with impeachment, they spend so much every time they pass a piece of legislation. It costs a lot of money. So the fact they're not going to be passing any legislation may save the taxpayers a whole lot of money, and the cost of impeachment may actually be a budget benefit because if Congress is tied up in this, they're not doing other stupid things. So there might be some value in that regard, but but you get down to it. Impeachment's bad for the country. It's bad when the president's talking to foreign leaders and they're uncertain whether or not he's going to be thrown out of office. It's not good. It doesn't make America more secure, and it really hurts the president's ability to make trade deals. Even though he's overcome this so far, because if there's the more there's uncertainty about whether or not he's going to be there in the short term, the less ability to do stuff. And that's what the impeachment is doing, is trying to make Donald Trump into a one-term lame duck. And the American people will make a decision whether he gets a second term. And if he gets a second term, he's going to, you're going to see a guy without these kind of gnats biting at him. You're going to see a guy who is significantly more, even more energized and more aggressive in terms of accomplishing his agenda. And I think it'll be good for America. But right now, this impeachment is just, it, it, it makes us look like idiots around the
Yeah,
world.
and also, it kind of sets a precedent for the impeachment process that you don't really have to do something criminal to get impeached. I mean, according to the law, you are supposed to commit something criminal to be impeached, or something major, like Andrew Johnson, your fumble Reconstruction. That's big enough to be called for impeachment. But I mean, these are like frivolous charges they have against them. What
Well, they're
precedent
not
does that
even.
set?
There's no criminal charges, and the president's team makes that case in their uh, brief that they filed with the Senate, that there was no. They don't even charge him with any crimes. So when you get down to it, the whole thing is based on a false narrative. So you've got so it doesn't meet the basic criteria, which is why the president has urged a quick determination, a quick and fair determination, because they don't believe, and I don't believe, that there are even any actionable charges under the Constitution. And I think there's a reasonable case that can be made that the president could take this to the court, to the Supreme Court, and say, you know, there were no charges against me that were actionable, and hence this is an invalid impeachment. I hope we don't have to get to that point, but that certainly would be a viable case, because unless impeachment is whatever House and Senate decides it is, and they can make up whatever rules they want to, in that case, you can get impeached because Orange Man is bad. But you shouldn't. That's not the way it's supposed to be, and this president's being really abused under this process.
Yeah, you don't see as much reaction to Orange Man bad on social media today as you would have, say, in 2017.
Right.
So it seems like it's just not picking up the type of momentum that the people behind this wanted. And there are not a lot of laws in this country to protect those who have had false accusations thrown at them. But it might be a good idea for Trump to fight back. And I'm saying that for future reference, because if you're throwing around something like an impeachment, like making an impeachment on frivolous charges, that sets a precedent. I mean, that ruins the charges.
I think I agree. I think that the single best prohibition against frivolous impeachment is if the people who conducted the impeachment get thrown out of office. And so, if Nancy Pelosi loses the speakership in 2020, in the 2020 election, and it's because of impeachment, it'll cause, hopefully, it will cause future houses to be more reticent about taking this grave step, and when they actually don't have a crime. So you get down to it. In the Clinton thing, Clinton lied. Clinton perjured himself. That was clear. Nobody debated that. It was a matter of whether or not the Senate wanted to throw him out of office for that crime, and they chose not to. In this case, they don't have something like that. There's no grounds, and hence there's no
Nothing.
rationale for this. And the only real way of dealing with it is to make it so the members of the House of Representatives who represent districts that President Trump won, those members need to pay a price for voting to impeach this president. And that price has to be at the ballot box. So, folks, if you're mad, go to the ballot box. Make sure you vote. Make sure you get your friends to vote. Make sure your friends are registered, and take it out on the politicians who foisted this upon the country.
Now, I remember years ago when I was with you guys, first time around, Nancy Pelosi was being heralded as being very productive. And, to my knowledge, she's still being heralded as being very productive, but it's all bad productivity. That's what we were saying then, and that's what it looks like now. She would come down here. I'm in Texas. She would come down here, do the photo op in front of all the migrants and talk about, how Trump is doing a terrible job. Once that immigrant crisis was halted, she hasn't been down here. She's doing basically all bad stuff. And it makes you wonder if America is going to say, okay, get this woman out, just like they did in 2010. Get this woman out of the speaker's chair. We don't want to see her ever again. She's just doing bad stuff. Do you think so?
Well, I think we've got a choice of what we want to be in America. And Nancy Pelosi and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren represent one choice, and uh, Donald Trump and Jim Jordan and others represent another choice. And we have to make a decision of what we want to be for the next 20 years. And ultimately, you can't be both Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump. You can't be both Nancy Pelosi and Ted Cruz. What we need is to make a choice for the direction of the country and then do it. Right now, the country is more prosperous than it has ever been. More people have jobs than have ever had jobs. Fewer people are unemployed than at any time since the year 2000, when there were 21 million fewer people in the workforce. Listen, Frank, that's really significant, because when people are unemployed, there's a despair, there's a fear, there's a lack of hope. Even if they know that where the next job's coming from or hope to, they tighten up. They're unable to do things, and they lose their freedom of action, and fear takes over. And so we have fewer people unemployed now than any time since the year 2000. That matters. That matters because it's a function of hope. If you don't have a job, you don't have a capacity to take care of your family, your hope goes away, and it gets withered away, and it gets beaten down, and it hurts your psyche. And and fewer and fewer people have that happening to them now. And certainly as a percentage, very fewer lowest unemployment rates in 50 years since Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. So we've got an incredible economy, and ultimately the question people are going to have to ask is, which direction do you want to go? Do you want an America that's based on individual rights and free enterprise and choosing your own direction in life? Or do you want a country where the government is doing everything for you, as basically you're dependent upon the government for every action, and you are effectively, if the government decides they're not going to do something, there's nothing you can do about it. Those are the two choices, and they're very stark. And they're showing up in this presidential campaign. So people make a choice. It's simple.
We were talking about how when you scroll through social media, which is part of our daily lives, Twitter and Facebook, you don't see the horrible posts about Donald Trump anymore. You really don't. You might today see something about how, there were a bunch of idiots protesting for gun rights in Virginia, but you don't see like, get that horrible Trump out of here. And
You
perhaps
don't read
that
the
is,
same websites that I do, but anyway.
well, there were not as many, not as many. In 2017, you had people tweeting out the comedian holding up his severed head.
Right,
2017. So, you don't see that anymore. You still see, people bad mouthing Trump, but not as much. And I think a lot of that is because they're looking around. Maybe this is the people in the middle. They're looking around and seeing that they and their friends are working again. And the guys had a good
Well,
performance.
I would hope so. I would hope so. But I think part of it is they've, um, if you watch an MSNBC, a CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, you get your Google headlines fed to you, you get your Facebook news fed to you. You turn on your computer and you see MSN's headlines. You get a pretty steady stream of uh, slanted perspectives through most of the media you receive. 94% of the media on Trump has been negative. The ABC, NBC, and CBS didn't do a single minute on the ratification of the USMCA. Not a single minute. This was a total redo of NAFTA. It changes everything in terms of a relationship between us and our two biggest trading partners. And the three major news networks devoted zero coverage. That's so in some ways the way you end up harming Donald Trump is you don't tell people what's actually going on. You deny them access to the news through your editorial choices of what you cover. And that's what we see. We see, an unending flow of negative stories about the president and no coverage on his successes. And that is how the media can manipulate people to vote against their own interests, because they hope that people will be ignorant and just listen to what they say. Fortunately,
If
people
you
are
think
not.
the people are seeing it, like I was talking about the social media posts, just the guy you went to high school with years ago who, 2 years ago saying, "Oh, I hate Trump," isn't saying that as much on social media. That's what I've noticed at least.
Well,
And
I hope that's right.
but do you think that the people are seeing that he's actually doing a good job and they're making up their own mind to kind of pull off on bashing Trump as much as the mainstream media is? My understanding of what I've seen out on the streets is that people are seeing it. They're seeing that their friends are working, their cousin is working again, they're working again. There's a much better atmosphere out there than there was in the workplace 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were all desperate.
I think there's an kind of an undertone that this Trump guy's done a pretty good job. But I think most people are reticent to say that. People aren't sitting there. Nobody's looking to get into a fight, so people don't wear "Make America Great Again" hats around as much as they might, because quite honestly, who needs the grief? So you go to a restaurant, you order your food, you wear a MAGA hat, and then you got to worry if the people spit in your food. So
But they're going to throw it up.
so you sit there and you say, well, I don't need to show my support for the president. I think the president has a great deal of underlying support that's unreported and unpollable. And if I had to bet, this president is going to win re-election, and it isn't even going to be close.
I think you're right. I think there is more support, people kind of under the radar moving over towards him. Maybe they were being trained 2 years ago to talk about how horrible he was and say, I hate him. But I think they're now under the radar moving towards Trump. And that's just, again, because they see the way things are today versus 10 years ago. And they remember how desperate we all were 10 years ago. And they don't have that feeling today. So, um, you got to give the guy credit. You got to give the guy credit, even if you were trained to hate him. I mean, so many people you can tell they've been trained, brainwashed to say, Trump, he's horrible." But the reality is, they're seeing it now that he's making things happen. They're seeing the Dow Jones nearing 30. I mean,
Yeah,
you imagine?
there's a lot of evidence, but it's reminds me of the Book of Romans. Okay, and in the Book of Romans, it says, well, he asks the question, what about people who don't know, who haven't, who live in a place which haven't been reached by anybody who's a Christian to talk to about Jesus Christ? And Paul replies that the evidence is all around them. They can see it from creation itself, which shows the designer's hand in it, and so God reveals Himself through your surroundings. The challenge is the inputs people get through media and so-called trusted sources are in conflict with the world, the things that they can see around them, the lack of people who are unemployed, the fact that their kid or the neighbor kids now has a job, the fact that there's that suddenly they're not worried, they can take a vacation, they feel comfortable to take a vacation, as opposed to saying we better do a staycation this year because we don't know what's going to happen. So their lives transform in a subtle way, and that's the evidence that's all around them. And ultimately, the question will be, do people in America want to change, go in a different direction or not? And I would hate to have to make the case as the Democrats when, that, oh, let's go a different direction at a time when there's 3.5% unemployment. Okay. Most people are going to say that's too risky and we're not doing it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It would seem to defy common sense, but let's not forget the Democrats are going to be spending a lot. They're good fundraisers, and they're good with things like the media and persuading people, with even the arts and films. Maybe they will be able to make some progress at that. But I think once it gets down to the voting booth, people are going to be thinking to themselves, wait a minute, things are a lot better now than they were 10 years ago. And I don't want to go back.
The president has a compelling case for re-election, and it would be unprecedented in American history for somebody with this economy going into 2020, going into an election year, to actually not be reelected. So that would be unprecedented. And I have to tell you, one of the great concerns I have is this impeachment. If it does drag on, it has the effect of depressing people, not from an election standpoint, but from a sense of security and saying, okay, we know what's going to happen. Ultimately, even if you support think Donald Trump did something wrong in some way, shape, or form, you get a chance to vote on him in November. Okay? You get a chance to go to the ballot box and make that decision again. And for Congress to try to step in and impeach a president who did nothing wrong by their own articles of impeachment, can't name
Yeah.
actual crimes or high crimes or misdemeanors, to try to remove him from office a year before he's up for election is really taking that choice out of the hands of the voters. And we need to just we need to let the voters decide in November. And I think ultimately this president will be acquitted in this impeachment hearing. A and B, I think it's pretty clear that if the election were held today, it's really hard to convince people in Michigan when there's 76,000 new auto jobs being created that you ought to get rid of the president who negotiated the deal to have that happen. It's really hard to get rid of the people to convince people in Wisconsin, which depends on dairy, that you ought to hire people who want to ban flatulating cows out of climate change concerns. Okay, so you look at, it's hard to go to people in Pennsylvania who have hope because of fracking and say, no, we're going to eliminate fracking. We're going to eliminate the thing that has brought back the middle class in Pennsylvania, has brought back hope in Pennsylvania by the blue collar workers. So, it's really hard to make those cases in those states that are growing and where people were left behind and now they're finding their footing. And with billions upon billions of new foreign ag sales, go to Agricultural America and say, gee, you're selling billions of more products overseas. Your exports are stronger than ever. And there's a demand for your beef or your corn or your soybeans or your cotton, more so than ever because of trade deals that have been done. It's really going to be hard to convince them that they should turn out the president to negotiate those trade deals. So ultimately, this president hasn't just done stuff that seems like good stuff, like cutting taxes and that kind of thing. He's also done the trade part of it, which actually changes the dynamic of our economy and makes Americans able to compete on a worldwide scale. And people, as we discover that, as we see the effects of that, people are going to be beneficiaries of Donald Trump's agenda and Donald Trump's vision for America, and they will not vote against their own interests.
Sounds like you're right. And again, it's a very different place now than it was 10 years ago. We met 10 years ago, and
We
just
did.
remember my life wasn't going too great. I went from being on top of the world to fighting to survive. And I know many other people who were in the same boat, and feels much better, much more safe now than than it did back in those days.
And one of the great things about this, Frank, is you and I have been we worked together for a few years, and now circumstances have allowed us to get back together and do these kind of things, and it's always good to get to work with super talented people, and so it's really a great opportunity to work with you and who bring just enormous talent and personality to this screen. So I just really appreciate everything you're doing. And with all that, before we get too sappy, here's the thing, folks. We're going to do these things. I predict they're going to be a lot shorter in the future, but we're going to do these kind of conversations about impeachment and other items. And so if you want to catch it, be informed about it, just click on the subscribe button, and so you will be notified when these things are occurring. And hopefully this is informative to you and helpful to you. We strive to do that. If you have any comments to me directly, just send an email, rmanning@getliberty.org. That's rmanning@getliberty.org. If you have any topics you'd like for us to talk about, we could do that. And because this isn't a Paris Hilton video, I watched her video where she was cooking, And it was like it was the biggest train wreck. She was cooking lasagna. It was the biggest train wreck I've ever seen. So it was
What,
like
what in God's name are you doing watching Paris Hilton videos?
cooking lasagna. Um, it was actually on a recommended list, and I said
Okay.
this. And somebody said, a friend of mine who I worked with at the Department of Labor said, "This is the funniest video I've ever seen." And so I said, "Okay, well, I'll watch it." And it was 10 minutes of her being in a kitchen she'd never been in before, trying to cook lasagna, complaining about not having the right utensils, and going through drawers trying to find the right utensils, and and the assistant didn't get her something she needs. And so the real question for episode 2 of the Paris cooking stuff is, did the assistant survive the time period between this encounter and the next one, because she kept not finding stuff and she was mad. She wasn't mad, but she was it was just, it was a train wreck. It was a complete train wreck. And I will tell you, I actually turned it off before she got done with lasagna, because the woman, I swear to Frank, she sat there and she goes, "I don't know what this is. Himalayan pink salt. This looks good." Turns 7 screw. So she grinds 7 grinds on the lasagna. No idea. No idea. It's just that, oh, I don't feel like chopping the onions and the garlic, so we just won't put that in the lasagna. I mean, come on. It's like it was just, oh my God. This was, go to Stouffer's, Paris. Go to Stouffer's. Get the lasagna, stick it in the oven, 45 minutes, it comes out, it's good. Don't make it yourself.
Is that what they call affluenza? Is she suffering from affluenza?
I don't know, but it's but I suspect she had more cooks than we do. So let's get out of this thing,
We'll
Frank.
change that. Yeah, okay. It's time to move on. We will see you. I'm assuming we're going to see you tomorrow. Rick, always a pleasure. Please subscribe. I should have said that at the beginning. I'll say that now. Please subscribe. And always very informative to talk to Rick Manning. I've known him for a long time now, and he's hyper informed. Well, I guess that's it.
Hasta la
See you
vista.
tomorrow.